Did Islam and its top debater just get destroyed? Recently, there was a debate between Christian Apologist Godlogic and Muslim apologist Deenresponds. In that video, Godlogic claimed to destroy Deenresponds.
You're about 5 seconds from just getting out of here because you're such a liar, bro.
What?
However, is this claim true? So I decided to go and watch the debate. What I found out was quite surprising. So if you want to know if Deenresponds and Islam actually got destroyed by Godlogic or not, then please watch this video until the very end. So let's get started. So in this video, inshallah, I will review the debate between Godlogic and Deenresponds to see who actually won the debate. So let's see what they have to say, and then I'll make my response, inshallah.
Where do the secular scholars get the teachings of the apostles?
Yeah, these multiple sources, they would do like textual criticism on the Bible. So the Bible would be one of their sources, but they wouldn't be taking it wholesale because obviously they would be saying, they would be critiquing the reliability of the sources because
they say that this is what they believed and taught. They used the Bible, and you admitted it.
This is an obvious lie. First of all, here he's committing the hasty generalization fallacy. First of all, the secular historians are not a monolith. There is multiple variations of opinions among the secular historians in academia.
Let's just talk about physical resurrection of Jesus. It's absolutely clear that in Paul's day, we're talking the 50s, that Jesus was never met physically resurrected. That they were encountered in hallucinations and dreams that they themselves regarded as revelations. They did not touch the hands of Jesus and have dinner with him. 20 years time, Mark is talking about an empty tomb. If that could happen to the dead Jesus, right? If you can invent an actual dead Jesus walking around in that time, well, it's easier to invent the rest of Jesus, right? It's very clear that you can invent whole people in a matter of 40 years, including, resurrected Jesuses. So if you can do it with a resurrected Jesus, you can do it with a historical Jesus.
They would be critiquing the reliability of the sources because
they say that this is what they believed and taught. They say that this is what they believed and taught.
It's very clear that you can invent whole people in a matter of 40 years, including, resurrected Jesuses.
Why do you dislike Paul?
I'll go back to what the other brother was saying. He contradicts what the apostles taught. This is historically taught that if you look at the historicity of the earliest Christians, they didn't believe Jesus to be deified, and this was a later development. And it's proven that Paul did have some form of deified conception of Jesus to at least some extent.
I got you. So whoever goes against the teachings of the apostles, then you're a false messenger?
Yeah, so any theological distinctions, you'll be seen as someone that's deviating from the doctrines that Jesus taught.
And the argument that Brother Deen makes is actually a very correct one, because there are clear examples of Paul openly contradicting what the disciples of Jesus taught. For example, in Acts 10:28, it says, he said to them, "You are well aware that it is against our law for a Jew to associate with or visit a Gentile." So this is something that Peter is saying, right? So basically, Peter is preaching that Jewish Christians should not mingle with non-Jewish Christians. So he's kind of reminding the non-Jews that I'm not supposed to mix with you or mingle with you, right? And what's interesting, you'll actually see this in the teachings of Jesus himself. Jesus also said, I did not come except for the lost sheep of Israel. He came for the Jews, not necessarily for the Gentiles. And Peter is basically preaching that. However, Paul contradicts this, right? So in Antioch, in Galatians 2, there's a story, and it says the following. When Cephas, Peter, came to Antioch, I opposed him. This is Paul speaking. I opposed him to his face because he stood condemned. For before certain men came from James, he used to eat with the Gentiles. But when they arrived, he began to draw back and separate himself from the Gentiles because he was afraid of those who belonged to the circumcision group. So basically, in this story, Paul argued with Peter because Peter wouldn't mingle with these non-Jews, right? And he wouldn't eat with them. Paul hated that, and so he basically started calling him a hypocrite. The other Jews joined him, so that by their hypocrisy, even Barnabas was led astray. When I saw that they were not acting in line with the truth of the gospel, I said to Peter, in front of them all, "You are a Jew, yet you live like a Gentile, not like a Jew. How is it that you force Gentiles to follow Jewish customs?" This is in Galatians 2:11-14. We don't know what response Peter gave to Paul here, but this is clearly obvious that Peter and Paul did not get along. So Paul clearly contradicted what Peter taught and what Jesus taught, right? So this is one of the most blatant examples of Paul openly defying the disciples of Jesus. Please note, Paul has never met Jesus. He also completely went against James himself. James, who was also a disciple of Jesus. James basically teaches that faith without action is meaningless. He says, in the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. And what's interesting is that you can actually see this in the life of Jesus, because Jesus didn't just preach, he actually took action, right? He performed miracles. That itself debunks, any idea that you can just have faith and that'll be okay. But Paul taught the opposite. What? Paul taught that no, if you just have faith, that's enough. For example, Paul basically said, or we maintain that a person is justified by faith apart from the works of the law. You can read about this in Romans 3:28. So yeah, basically James taught that only having faith is not enough. When Jesus also taught that. But here Paul is saying that no, only having faith is enough. So these are the clear contradictions. I have a special guest, which is brother MENJ.
So we don't believe in Paul's so-called apostleship. And when we look at Paul's teachings, you will find that Paul actually contradicted Jesus. So, of course, we do not, as Muslims, we do not accept that Paul was elected by Jesus or was an apostle of Jesus. To qualify as an apostle of Jesus would mean that you would have slept with Jesus, ate with Jesus, taught by Jesus directly, meeting with Jesus directly, die for Jesus, swim for Jesus, drink for Jesus, journeyed with Jesus, and your life is pretty much dedicated to Jesus' missions, which, by the way, Paul did not experience. So how could he be claimed to be an apostle of Jesus?
The scholars don't take it wholesale.
Wait a second. You yourself admitted that one of their sources that they glean from to get the teachings of the apostles is in the Bible. So when we look at the teachings of the apostles that we find in the Bible, you're saying that Paul contradicts them?
Yeah, from the historical actual conception of what the disciples taught, that would be contradicting what Paul taught. Now, to get an understanding of what the disciples taught, the scholars that I mentioned aren't going to be taking the Bible wholesale. That's like the composition.
Do they take the Bible to understand what the apostles taught?
Just allow me to finish. Yeah, they do take parts of the Bible there, but they don't take wholesale, as I said.
They take the Bible to know what what the apostles taught them.
That's a history fallacy. Just because they use the Bible to explain what might have happened doesn't mean that's the only source they use. They also use other historical information. Look at writings of Romans, other later non-Christian scholars. So it's not just that, they're just using the Bible to kind of like come to a conclusion.
Do the secular historical scholars conclude that the apostles believed that Jesus died by crucifixion and rose again on the third day? And that they thought that
Rising, the secular historians would not believe that.
Yes, they do.
So he's saying that the secular historians clearly believes that early disciples believe in the crucifixion. Here, he's just shifting the burden of proof fallacy. He's claiming something, right? This is a claim that all secular historians believe that early disciples believe that the crucifixion happened, but it's a claim. He provided no evidence for this. Now, he needs to prove that, but instead of proving that, he's asking Brother Deen to prove the opposite of it.
When Christian apologists tried to argue that Jesus was crucified, buried, and rose again, literally, how would you respond to these bold claims?
Well, the first thing I would tell them, and I'm going to be very blunt on this, most Christians, and I'm saying this for most scholars too, when they use the term rose, they don't know what they're talking about. Please understand, in the first century, there was a pan-Mediterranean understanding that very holy people like Moses, or very powerful people like Romulus, could be taken up to God or the gods upon death. If they happened to die, it didn't make any difference. They were raised up. The term is apotheosis in Greek. They were raised up. Resurrection is not a pan-Mediterranean. It's not a pan-Jewish. It's a sectarian, Pharisaic concept. It has to do with the fact that there is justice in this universe, and at the end of time, God will raise all the human race for judgment and heaven and hell as sanctions. So if you're talking about, as Paul talks about Jesus, 1 Corinthians 15, being raised in the sense of anastasis, that's the key word, you're making a huge claim that anastasis, resurrection with Jesus, is the beginning of the general resurrection. And Paul says that absolutely clearly in 1 Corinthians 15. In fact, he says, if there is no general resurrection, the end of time, there's no Jesus resurrection. No Jesus resurrection, no general resurrection. It never occurs to him, because it couldn't conceptually, that Jesus might be raised as a special privilege because he's the Messiah or he's the Son of God or whatever. By all means, ascension, fine. That's completely in the thinking of the whole Mediterranean.
Jesus died by crucifixion and rose again on the third day?
No, rising, the secular historians would not believe that.
Yes, they do.
It never occurs to him, because it couldn't conceptually.
Yes, they do.